Well, why don't we maybe get started with some introductions? I know Becky and I have a lot of fun and interesting stuff to share, so I want to make sure we have time for that. But I know we'll probably have some people kind of chiming in as we go. But welcome one and all. My name is Brett Thielen. I'm the science director for the Harris Center for Conservation Education. And Becky Swamala and I are going to be kind of presenting tonight's training. She's from New Hampshire Audubon. The three organizations sponsoring this talk are the Harris Center, New Hampshire Audubon, and Keene State College. For you Keene State folks out there, as we were chatting, Keene State has hosted nesting nighthawks and been very supportive of our monitoring efforts over the years. So we're really grateful to them for that. Speaking of Zoom etiquette, a few things to keep in mind as we go tonight for kind of hopefully a seamless Zoom viewing experience. Many of you are probably familiar with this by now, but in general, we're asking everyone to keep themselves muted so that we don't have a lot of feedback. If you do have questions, you can put them in the chat box at the bottom, and then we'll monitor that throughout. And if you, as you probably got a notice, this is being recorded. That's so that anyone who couldn't join us tonight could still have a chance to watch this. So if you don't want to appear in the video, you can turn your video off. We won't see you. You can also turn your video off if you're finding that you're having some issues with slow internet speeds. Sometimes that helps. We do have closed captioning running. You can turn that off on your own screen if you like, if you find that distracting. Down at the bottom, you might see it under more and then hide subtitles. I think that might be it for Zoom etiquette at the moment. Am I missing anything on that front? I don't think so. So I'll just briefly introduce myself and the Harris Center for those of you who are new to us. The Harris Center is a nonprofit based in the Monadnock region of Southwest New Hampshire. We help people fall in love with the natural world through land protection, conservation research, and education. On the land protection front, those of you who are local to us, I always like to point out that we've protected more than 24,000 acres of land from development, and much of that's open for recreation such as hiking and birding. We coordinate conservation research on those protected lands and throughout the region through a variety of community science projects, including the one that you are going to hear about tonight with New Hampshire Audubon. And really at the heart of everything we do is education for all ages, from babies in backpacks to residents of retirement communities and all points in between. This year, a lot of that has been on Zoom, but we're starting to transition back into some in-person programming for folks who are local to us. So you can see more about our upcoming summer programs and register for them at harriscenter.org. And I also always just like to thank, and I'm sure Becky will do this too, thank our donors who make all of this possible. So thank you if you're already a supporter of the Harris Center or New Hampshire Audubon, and if you aren't yet, I encourage you to check us out. Becky, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, well, I'm Becky Swamala with New Hampshire Audubon, and New Hampshire Audubon is a statewide Audubon society. We are not affiliated with National Audubon. We are just within the state of New Hampshire, and we're involved with environmental education. We also have sanctuaries. We have conservation science, which this project is a part of, and we have a policy arm as well that's active with policy issues that impact wildlife and wildlife habitat. We are supported by donors and members, so we do appreciate support. And Project Nighthawk, for which I'm the coordinator, is totally supported by donations. It's entirely possible. It's made possible entirely by donations. So I really appreciate folks who have donated to the project.
Okay, so on to the Nighthawks. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you see, Becky, is this showing up or everyone can?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, wonderful. So welcome to the volunteer training for Project Nighthawk. This is a project focused on monitoring really remarkable bird species throughout New Hampshire. Becky's been at this far longer than I have and knows far more than I do, but we're going to be sharing. I've been doing this in Keene for about 15 years through the Harris Center and working with Becky on this. So we're kind of going to share the training and go back and forth a bit. I always like to, as at the part of the beginning, is to invite people to think of this like a quest, which is to say that you're searching for something rare and captivating. And also, in some instances, there may be a high likelihood that you won't find what you seek, but that hopefully you'll enjoy the search, that there's enjoyment to be found. In this case, in being out on summer nights, watching and looking and listening to the world around you. So we're going to start with an introduction to Nighthawks, talk a little bit about their ecology, the decline that they're experiencing, and then how volunteers can help keep track of them and what that really entails, what we're looking and listening for, where we're going to be looking and listening for it. But I always like to start these by talking about what a terrible name they have for who they are, common nighthawk. We're going to kind of break this apart into pieces. And also their scientific name is perhaps more appropriate, Cordyales minor, Cordyales meaning musical chord at dusk. But we'll start with the first part of their name, common, the common nighthawk. They once were common, they're not anymore. They are endangered in the state of New Hampshire and considered threatened or endangered in Connecticut, Delaware, Rhode Island, Vermont, parts of Canada. They're really in decline throughout their range. We'll talk more about that. Most confusing to people is the word hawk. They are not a hawk. Hawks, as I'm sure you know, are birds of prey with talons and beaks for kind of tearing apart flesh, eating mammals or frogs or songbirds. These are actually nightjars, more closely related to whippoorwills, and they're insectivores. So they exclusively eat insects on the wing. They get their name for the practice of how they hunt for insects, hawking, chasing them down in the air. But they're not hawks like you might see perched at the side of a highway waiting for a vole to scurry across their path. And the name nighthawk might lead you to believe that they're nocturnal. That's also not quite true. In fact, nighthawks are what we call crepuscular, which is your vocabulary word for the day, one of my favorite words, crepuscular, which means active at dawn and dusk, twilight times. And this is really helpful because for one thing I like to say in the beginning too is that so for someone who maybe doesn't consider themselves a birder, these are really great birds to watch. And so although I'm really interested in birds, I enjoy wild birds, I don't necessarily consider myself a very good birder. I can't tell warblers apart very well, one from the other, by sound. And I also don't like getting up very early in the morning for the dawn chorus when most birds are active. And so nighthawks are a great bird for people like me because they have very distinctive sounds that are not easily mistaken for other birds. They're active at sunset. So if you're a bit of a night owl, these are really great birds to kind of start to watch. They're also really interesting, acrobatic, fascinating to observe. But so if you don't consider yourself, I know there are people here who are very accomplished birders and consider themselves a birder and are birders. There's also probably some people who are beginners. And I just want to say, this bird is for you. This is an invitation to you. You don't have to know a million nuanced details to enjoy watching nighthawks and to feel confident in your observation of them. And part of that is the time that they're active. So a little bit about what they eat. They are insectivores, so they eat insects in the air. And it's kind of shocking to people that there are so many insects in the air. One report from Connecticut Audubon called them the plankton of the sky and talked about it as a whole ecosystem unto itself. 1 square mile of sky containing 32 million arthropods. I like to show this series of pictures just to show the nighthawk's mouth. If you look at that, it looks like a very small mouth and you think, how can they catch anything with that? But when they open their mouth, you can see they've got quite a gape and they've also got some bristly feathers that enable them to catch insects in midair. And there's throughout this presentation, there's some quotes from Birds of Massachusetts, a 1927 publication. And this one I like, he calls it a yawning trap to engulf unwary insects. They eat a lot of insects, in fact. So in the 80s, there was some a study that looked at stomach contents of nighthawks and found that one stomach contained more than 2,000 ants. Another one contained 500 mosquitoes. So they're really good for insect control for those of you who, which is pretty much all of us who are out at dusk around mosquitoes. It's good to have some nighthawks around. This picture, you can see this bird has its eyes set on a flying insect and it's just about to catch it. One other notable thing about them is that they have one of the longest migration routes of any North American bird. They overwinter in South America, perhaps very far South America, and then they come up all the way up into the Canadian Shield to breed. Because they are exclusively insectivores, they also have one of the latest migrations in the spring of any birds, because they need to wait for the flying insects to be around in order to fuel their journey. So they're just migrating through in the last few weeks. And in fact, in the next few weeks, there still may be migrants moving through. So they don't even start to arrive really until third week in May. And then because of this, they're also one of the first to leave each year. So we talk about the fall nighthawk migration. That hits its peak in about the third week of August because they're following the bugs. They are declining, and not just in the Northeast. These are some maps from the Breeding Bird Survey showing that the eastern region is experiencing decline, but throughout their range, they also breed out west, and everywhere they are in decline. In New Hampshire, one thing that is interesting about these birds is that during the Industrial Revolution, they started to adapt to cities by, which we're going to talk about their nesting habits. They're typically ground nesters in open areas and pine barrens, but they adapted when we started building really large factories and big city buildings with gravel rooftops. They adapted to nesting on those roofs and became an urban bird in many parts of the Northeast. And we had 16 different cities in New Hampshire in 1990 that had breeding season nighthawks, and now that's down to Keene and Concord. And in natural areas, less than 10 sites where they're kind of breeding in more natural areas throughout New Hampshire. Rocky ridgelines, granite balds, pine barrens. So any of you who've come to some of my other talks, I always like to talk about the so what, why should we care about this and about these birds. So these are really interesting birds. They have a lot of cultural significance for people. Henry David Thoreau noted them, hearing them from Mount Monadnock. For those of us in our region, that has a real touchstone. In doing this project since 2007, I've talked to a lot of people about nighthawks, especially when we were looking for nests on rooftops and asking for access to rooftops from people's buildings. And it was amazing to me how many people who don't consider themselves birders or nature people knew exactly what I was talking about. And in fact, one person who came to this training a few years ago said he grew up in Keene and he knew when he was a kid and was playing outside, it was time to go home for the night when he heard the nighthawks come out. So they've really become, for many city dwellers, a sound of the city. And of course, ecological import, one of the big things is aerial insectivores and their the number of insects they eat. This is another quote from Birds of Massachusetts, where he's talking about them being predators of agricultural pests, saying these birds should be protected everywhere at all times, even back in 1927, because of their important role in pest control. And aerial insectivores are on the decline everywhere. So it's not just nighthawks. They all deserve our attention. So the big question, of course, is why? Why is this decline happening? There's a lot of theories. There's some questions about habitat loss, both in their breeding habitat, as also overwintering habitat. Perhaps pesticide use is affecting insect populations, changes in the timing of their prey related to climate change. So they may be migrating at a time when insects used to be plentiful, but now that has become uncoupled. Predation, especially in cities. We have a lot of predators who are subsidized by our trash that we leave around. Perhaps hazards along the migration route. The bottom line is we don't know for sure, and it's probably some combination of factors rather than just one thing that is easy to solve on its own. So I'm going to turn this now over to Becky to talk a bit about the goals of this project.
All right, so one of the theories for why nighthawks had disappeared from cities was the conversion of those gravel roofs to rubber roofs, which are totally inappropriate for nighthawks to nest on. So we started Project Nighthawk in 2007 with the initial focus of putting gravel patches on rooftops in Concord and Keene to see if nighthawks would use those patches. And it became immediately obvious in the first year that we really needed to know more about the nighthawks that we had in the state. So one of the questions came up, well, if they aren't using the patches, is it because there aren't any nighthawks here? You know, we knew we had males, but we had no idea if we had females. We had no idea if we had nesting going on. If we had nesting, was it successful? Was it not successful? So was predation impacting the nesting? We just didn't know. So we started this effort to determine and really change focus to determine what do we have for nesting nighthawks in the state? Where are they? Are they successful? And what's the behavior that's associated with nesting? And so we had found ourselves, or I, to my great surprise, found myself using all this information that we collected pretty quickly. One of the things Brett mentioned was that what was the building, the art center, the media art center, where they changed the roof, and they were changing from stone to rubber in the middle of the summer. And there had been nighthawk activity over that roof. And so we went up there. Brett made contact with the folks working on the roof, and we went up there and literally combed that roof to make sure there was no nesting nighthawk on the roof before they tore the stone off of it. And what we think happened is that the nighthawks failed about, I think it was maybe 3 days before we went up there, that they had been nesting and that they had failed. And then the breeding behavior I've been using when I'm consulting on issues with nighthawks around wind turbines. So the information we've gathered has been really pretty important beyond just learning about nighthawks in the state. And we've been able to document a decline in nighthawks and contribute to the information that caused it to be upgraded. Upgraded to endangered, is that that's an oxymoron, but it's now endangered in the state. And part of that effort has been to get volunteer help. We've absolutely had to have volunteer help to make it possible to gather the observations we needed to get. So we're really happy that you all are interested in being a volunteer and being part of this really important effort. There are lots of sites where we need people to watch and see if nighthawks are still present. If we have activity, we try and determine if we've got breeding, and that takes more watching. And if we have nesting, then we want to determine if it's successful, and that takes more watching. And it's way more than any one person could do. So we're really excited that you all are interested in potentially volunteering for Project Nighthawk. And I'm going to let Brett explain some of the things that you kind of need to know and become familiar with as a volunteer.
Yeah, so when we're looking for birds, how do we know if we've seen and if we're seeing nighthawks is kind of the basic question. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to ID them by sight and sound, as well as some birds that you might potentially get them confused with and how to tell the difference. So by sight, they are about the size of a blue jay or a mourning dove. Occasionally I will confuse a mourning dove with a nighthawk, but nighthawks are, one, they have these white wing bars under their patches, which you can see in both of these pictures. They also are really skilled flyers and also kind of erratic flyers. So that's a key, the way that they fly is a key diagnostic. We have visuals here to tell male from female. I have to tell you that this is very challenging under low light conditions. So these are pictures that are great pictures. Lillian Stokes took them, kind of a master birder, but it can be tougher to tell a female. And the reason is, so males, well, for one thing, have a white chin patch you can see here, and they have those white tail bars. And in certain light conditions, you can make those out very clearly. The female, her throat patch is kind of buffy in color. It's almost indistinguishable. It's hard to tell. You just don't see it as well. And she doesn't have those tail bars. But beyond that, males make a lot of noise and are very showy, and females are much more secretive and quiet. And so one of the key identifying factors here is not necessarily, it is how the bird looks, but also how the bird sounds, and particularly the males. And so I'm going to play a short video. I'm going to switch my screen share here to show a video that will play some of these sounds for you. So let's see, hopefully this will work okay. We're going over here. So everyone still can see
South
this?
of Malheur National Wildlife
Here?
Refuge in Eastern Oregon.
Yes, I can hear.
Very long, maybe a half an hour. And there were nighthawks up in the air, several males displaying.
I'm going to just pause that for a minute, because there's two sounds that we're hearing. One is a painting sound that is made, that's a vocal sound, that's a voice. The other one that we just heard is a sound called booming, which we're going to talk about at length because it's indicative of nesting and courtship. And that's a sound made with air rushing through the wings. That's the sound. I always think of it as, if you ever watch the Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner cartoons, when the Roadrunner was running away, it went, woo. That's what that boom sounds like to me. It's a sound that is low and doesn't travel very far, but if you're close by, you can hear it.
The calling and booming are typically heard at dawn and early evening. The nasal peent is a call that is given in flight, and then you hear what sounds like a truck roaring by that suddenly just disappears. And that's a mechanical sound produced as the bird goes into a dive. Air rushes through the primary feathers, and as it comes out of the dive, the rushing of air ceases and the boom suddenly stops. The common nighthawk is a really graceful, aerodynamic bird. It has a fairly slender, tapered body, a very small bill, almost inconspicuous, long tapered wings with white blazes right in the bend of the wing or the wrist of the wing. So as they fly in good light conditions, you see these blazes of white flash as the wings are raised and lowered. What I hadn't experienced up to that point was the males coming down, diving within a meter of the ground, within 3 feet of the surface. What had been a distant experience, spectacular experience, hearing them call and watching them chasing one another, actually becoming a very intimate experience within meters of where I was standing. It's a really fascinating display to watch.
So just real quickly, if you see a nighthawk in flight like this, and you're trying to tell whether it's a male or female, focus on the throat, ignore the tail. I've never seen the white bands easily in flight in the evening, but I have seen the white throat. So that's your just a little tip. If you're wondering what to focus on, look at that throat.
And we'll say this again, but only males peent repeatedly and boom. So if you are hearing that painting, that is a male. And if you're hearing or seeing that spectacular dive or hearing that boom, that's a male as well.
Yeah, it's the constant peating. Females technically do peat. So if you hear an occasional peat, you may not know, but if it's a constant peating, that's going to be the male.
So there's one sound alike in our area that also peats. And every year I get an email from somebody in April who's really excited because they think the Nighthawks have returned. And instead what they've heard is a woodcock, the American woodcock. So they peent as well, but there are some pretty key differences. One is that the nighthawk peents while flying from overhead. The woodcock peents from the ground. The habitat, there's some overlap, but not a lot of overlap. So nighthawks are in cities, along rivers, rocky outcrops. Woodcocks tend to be around wet meadows and forest edges. They both can occur in fields. That's the overlap. And then the timing. So right now, I suppose in theory, you might hear woodcocks right now. But I don't hear them as much. I hear them mostly March, April, May, and then the nighthawk is painting from May through August. So if you hear painting in July, it's not a woodcock. And if you hear painting in the downtown Concord or Keene, it's not a woodcock. And so that's one way to tell. And I do want to share a quick video just to show the painting, because it does also sound a little different to me, a little more nasally. And you can see them making it from below here. They're one of the more comical birds in nature, I think. So that's our woodcock. That's our only real sound alike. We also have a look-alike. The nice thing about nighthawks is there's not a ton of birds that are active, really active at dusk. You know, we'll see robins, we might see mourning doves. The only one that kind of flies a lot in the air that you might mistake initially for a nighthawk could be a chimney swift, but there are some key differences here too. So the nighthawk again is the size of a blue jay, so a bigger bird. Chimney swifts are much smaller than that. Nighthawks have those distinctive white wing bars. Chimney swift are kind of all gray. Some people I've heard them called cigars with wings, that the shape of their body is different. Nighthawks tend to be solitary, or you might see, if there's nesting or territorial defense, you might see 2 or 3 birds, but you probably won't see more than that. Whereas chimney swifts are often in small flocks. And then the nighthawk paints, and the chimney swifts are the original twitters. They twitter. I have a real quick clip just to hear what they sound like. Hopefully this will play. Oh, maybe we can't hear their twittering very well, but you can see they're flying in this. So if you see a group of birds flying that are smaller than a blue jays, you've probably got chimney swifts. We definitely have them in Keene. I'm sure you have them at your Concord watch sites as well. But you'll hear them doing a real high-pitched extended twitter, which is quite different from the painting.
There's one other species just to be aware of. It's not really a look-alike, but it does nest on rooftops, gravel rooftops, and that's killdeer. And when they fly off the roof in the dark, they can have a remarkably similar silhouette to nighthawks. So it's just something to be aware of.
We haven't run into those in Keene too much, but that's really good to know.
Yeah, you wouldn't probably in Keene, but we have at the mall in Concord and in another rooftop in Concord where they actually nested, same rooftop that nighthawks had nested on.
Wow. So what we're really looking for, as we've talked about, are signs that nesting is happening. And there's some courtship, the booming and the diving, that is what we're really looking and listening for, that indicate nesting. And so this is what we're hoping to see. This is kind of the holy grail of what you're searching for, is birds who are booming and diving, because they are likely doing that near a nest site. Again, only the males boom and dive. And what we're looking for and hoping to see is repeated painting, circling overhead in the sky, that booming, the diving. And if there's a nesting attempt happening, this will happen in the same place night after night until something changes. Whether that change might be that the nest failed, that this is the first clue. And the nests we're going to talk about are very difficult to find and to see. So in many cases, this behavior is the only way we can know that nesting is being attempted or taking places, especially if a nest is on a rooftop that we simply can't access, or is on private property, or is in a, you know, a ground nest in an area where they're just so well camouflaged, you'll never see them. But this is what we're looking for and hoping to see. And if there is a nest attempt, the males will be booming and diving in the same place night after night until that nest fails, or the chick is, you know, fledging and moving on in the world. And I have one, it's not a great video, but my last video to share, it does show the boom a bit. It's really hard to get a good video of the birds doing this, but this shows it a little bit. So there he comes in. So it's circling overhead, painting, flapping, and then that dive that comes really close to a rooftop or the ground with that kind of growling sound at the end. This is a diagram from 1925 that shows the flight from kind of a side view. So starting 50 feet up, looking like it's about to crash into the ground, and then pulling up at that time and having the air rush through those wings. Is there any more you want to say about booming or diving, Becky, that I have missed?
No, just to keep in mind that males will boom and dive over potential nesting sites. The female may not take him up on the offer, in which case the booming stops, or it'll be sort of intermittent. But Brett's right, it will happen night after night if she decides that's a good spot and they make a try at it.
So we've been talking about nesting. It really should be nest in quotation marks, because they don't actually construct any sort of structure for their eggs. There's no actual nest. So nesting is a verb describing what they're doing, but it's not the noun. There's no nest. And instead, they are basically putting 1 or 2 eggs almost exclusively in the beginning. But if they have a failed nest and they try again, she may only lay 1 in a re-nesting attempt. They're putting them directly on the ground or on a gravel roof. This is why the gravel is really important, because it keeps those eggs from rolling away. It also is well camouflaged. They look like little stones. They're very difficult to see. That's their primary defense mechanism, is this camouflage here. So is there anything else about the eggs that you want to say, Becky, before we move on to?
Nope.
So one thing that is important to keep in mind for this project is that successful nesting is rare. And there's a number of reasons for this. One is the sex ratio. So through this project and others, we found that there's on average for every 1 female, 3 to 4 males. So for the last half a dozen years in Keene, I think we had 1 year with 2 nesting pairs, but for the most part, we'll see 1 pair and there might be 1 or 2 other males around. So that makes it difficult if they have a nest failure to recover when there's that kind of sex ratio. There's also predation, especially in urban areas. All of these kind of predators that we have trained that live really well alongside human beings, crows, raccoons, domestic cats, they're very vulnerable to weather. So think about what it's like or what you imagine it might be like on a rooftop in July. Very hot up there. If there's torrential downpours, like with thunderstorms, it can also flood, which can lead to drowning of the chicks. Also, these are insectivores. They need insects to eat. If it's too cold, there won't be a lot of flying insects around for them, and they may have to divert their attention from nesting to simply staying alive during a long cold period. Of course, human disturbance is also a factor, although sometimes that can be a benefit. So just something to keep in mind as you go out on your quest this year for the Keene folks. We've been watching for Nighthawks every summer since 2007, and we've only documented 4 successful nesting years. And 2 of those, at least 2 of those were at Keene State on rooftops. But and including last year. So I'm very hopeful for this summer, but it really underscores the challenges that these birds face when it comes to producing the next generation. But sometimes, despite all odds, they make it through. This is an amazing picture of a nighthawk mama and 2 chicks from Concord. And then I'm going to turn it over to Becky to tell the story of this bird, which is quite remarkable.
So this picture was taken in Brookline, Mass, and it came my way because we had started Project Nighthawk. And they'd been doing the breeding bird atlas in Massachusetts and had not found any nesting nighthawks. And I got this photo, and there's a female nighthawk on that empty charcoal bag, and she laid eggs on that bag. I'm like, what? You've got to be kidding. And not only that, the eggs hatched and the chicks were running around on the deck. I don't know anymore. This was the last picture that I got because I never had direct contact with the person who was taking the photos that owned this deck. This was an elevated, like, 2nd floor deck where they barbecued. So you just never know. I mean, they can nest in some of the oddest places, and sometimes it works.
So here's the series just to show how quickly they grow. So incubation, about 18 to 20 days, exclusively, I think, by the female of the eggs. And then there's another 18 days or so till their first flight. They grow pretty quickly if they don't get eaten. So here's, how old is this chick, Becky? Do you think?
About 3 days.
3 days. 3 days after that, it's already starting to have its kind of feathers come in there. It's been feathers. Another 4 days later. And then another 11 days after that, this is a fledgling at this point. So just to show how quickly they grow. And then at that point, the females and the chicks are very similar in appearance. So their nests are very well camouflaged, particularly in natural areas. I like this. The eggs so closely resemble the rock, earth, or gravel on which they rest, and the young so simulate in appearance clods or horse droppings covered with mold. I thought that was a great description from Forbush in 1927. Some pictures of what their nests look like in both natural sites and rooftops. So this is Ossipee. And so when we say we're looking for nests, we're looking for female birds sitting on the ground because they're presumably sitting on eggs or roosting, have chicks with them. And then eventually when the chicks get big enough, we'll be able to see the chicks if they're still there. Here again is a couple of eggs just on the ground. There's no nest there. Gravel yards, industrial areas, they will nest there. This is a rooftop nest. Sometimes on roofs, they'll be near shade structures like around the edge, or sometimes you'll have other things on roofs that can provide just a little bit of shade. So there's that female and her chick. Okay, and so now I'm going to turn it over back to Becky to talk about the surveys and what is involved.
All right. Well, here in Keene and Concord and Ossipee, we have done coordinated surveys where we have multiple people, each at different sites on the same night for the same time. Sometimes we'll be connected by radio or by cell phone. What that does is allow us to figure out if a nighthawk is moving from one site to another. You know, it's going over, somebody may see it, and it just helps give us a much better idea of how many different birds we have if we're all watching at the same time. But individual observations are also really critical, and anybody can go out on any day, any evening, and check a site. And we really, really, really appreciate that a lot. There are lots of sites to check, and Brett and I can give some ideas on priority sites to focus in on. But starting now, it's great nighthawk watching time. And so when we go out, what are we looking and listening for? So Brett's described a lot of the appearance and what they're doing. But as you're out there watching, there are some things you want to sort of focus in on. that diving and booming by the male. Again, the male's the only one who does the diving and booming, and typically he's going to do that at a potential nest site repeatedly. So that's a sort of key behavior to watch. If you see the diving, you know you have a male. If you see a bird flying over and it does one peent, you don't know if you have a male or a female. So again, focusing on that throat, but we're going to watch for that diving and booming, and then other activities the male might undertake, such as chasing off another male, an interloper, or chasing a female. And lots of times when you're watching, you don't know whether the male is chasing another male or a female. I was watching one time and there was a 3-bird chase, and I was sure that there were 2 males chasing a female. I got to look at the throat of the lead bird, and it was a male, and it was 2 males chasing another male. So it was 3 males in chase. So you can make no assumptions. That's one thing about Nighthawks, you can make no assumptions. They will always surprise you. And landing and lifting off from a rooftop are really pretty concrete signs of nesting. Normally, birds are flying around overhead and peeping and or feeding. They don't usually land unless they're roosting for the night or the day, or there's a nest. That's it. They don't just sort of land for the heck of it. They land because there's something going on from a nesting standpoint at that site. So that's pretty critical behavior to watch for as well.
I will add, it can be very difficult to tell whether a bird is landing on a roof. I have a lot of question marks on my data forms where we can't really tell if it landed or if it flew low across the roof and went off the other side without ever landing, depending on where you are. So it's a great reason to have friends or family out there watching with you, especially if there's a lot of activity around a roof, because you can look from different angles and get a better sense for whether that bird landed or not. But even if it's flying very low over a roof, that behavior is of interest and probably indicates nesting or a nesting attempt.
It is, and Brett, you're right. It can be really hard to tell if a bird has landed. And that's why the more watching you do, the more you get a sense of what the birds do. You sort of learn what their routine is. And when we get to nesting, there are certain routines that birds do. This is photos of Rhodes Hall where they nested in Keene last year. There's a little stone roof part, curved roof part, and that's where they were. But males will oftentimes circle low over a nest location. You can never say always with Nighthawks because there's some things that always change. But they oftentimes will land close to the female when she's incubating or when there are young, especially small young that they're feeding. They'll come in and land to feed. Females have a certain routine, and this is why we want you to pay attention to the timing that things are happening. Because females, when they're incubating, will usually leave to feed somewhere around 8:20 to 8:40. And then they come back usually about a half an hour later. And oftentimes the male will chase the female when she leaves or when she returns. So you may find on your form that you have a lot of activity around 8:30 and then not much, and then a lot of activity around 9 o'clock. That tells me there's a possible nest there. In fact, there's a probable nest there, especially if you get a view of a female. If you confirm there's a female and you have that behavior pattern, there's pretty likely a nest going on. And that's what all these observations have also contributed to, is our knowledge of the behavior patterns by and large. Again, they can change. We've had males peaking and booming constantly over a nest site. And then we had one male that we nicknamed Deadbeat Dad, because he came, painted a few times, that was it. And she's nesting on the roof. So that was one of our surprise behavior patterns. But that's those are the types of things you want to look for. If you are standing there and you have a male, like Greg was describing in the video, if you have a male that comes really low over your head, it's really startling, but it's a defensive behavior. It means you are close to a nest or a chick, and it's actually confirmation of breeding. It doesn't happen very often. It's only happened a few times to me, especially when it's a rooftop nest. But if you're near a ground nest, it can definitely happen.
And it happened on the sidewalk outside roads a few times last summer too.
Yeah. Cool. Was it when the chick was small or bigger?
When it was getting bigger and
Yeah.
it was moving around a little bit more, the male was, you know, would boom 5 feet above our heads a few times, very close to us.
Okay.
So some other, oh, sorry, go ahead, Becky.
I was just that was my lead in back to you.
So some other things to keep in mind as you're going out for your individual surveys, or even as we're planning for group nights, you really want to watch the weather. So clear, calm weather is what we're looking for here. So not heavy rain, not high winds, obviously not thunderstorms for your own safety, but the birds are not as active at those times as they are on clear, calm nights. And it's also harder to perceive them when there's a lot of wind or noise around. So you also want to watch the clock. So you're looking typically between 8 and 9:20 or 9:30. This is their most active time, and watching the entire time is the most helpful, because that's when you might see those periods of activity that Becky described with females kind of leaving a nest site and coming back. You can also watch in the early morning. Becky says 3:30 to 5 a.m. They shut things down by sunrise. So I am not that person, but maybe you are that person who would rather be out at 4 a.m. than 9 p.m. And that is an option, because the same behavior repeats itself then. As I said, it's really, ideally you want to watch for this whole window of time, because if you're only watching for 10 minutes, you really could miss something. That said, booming and diving, if you only are able to watch that and you see it for 10 minutes, we still want to know, because that really is courtship and nesting behavior. So we still want to know if you aren't able to watch for the whole time, but it's more information and more helpful information if you're able to watch for the whole time. Also, it helps us, even if you didn't see anything, it can confirm if you didn't see anything and you only watched for 10 minutes, well, maybe the birds were busy elsewhere, because they're not going to be active for that entire hour-and-a-half window. So if you only watch for 10 minutes, it doesn't really tell us whether there's a bird there or not. But if you watch for the entire window of time and you don't see any activity, that's a good indication that there's not much going on, especially if weather conditions are good. So do you need binoculars? This is where Becky and I differ a bit, and because of our skill level. I will say that I bring binoculars and I almost never use them, because when the birds are moving fast and light is low, I find it very difficult to get the binoculars up to my face fast enough and get everything in focus in such low light. And so I mostly am listening and looking without binoculars most of the time. But Becky encourages you to bring binoculars, and she'll share why.
There are sites where you absolutely must have binoculars. And I need to drag Brett out to some of the other places in the state where Nighthawks are active and are already painting and out there when you arrive on site at 8 p.m. because the sun is still up. There's plenty of light to see them, and you can see the throat on the Nighthawks if you have binoculars, and you can determine whether you have a male or a female. We do see this in Concord. We see it a lot in Ossipee because there are more males there, and it seems from the observations we've done that the more males there are in the area, the more activity there is. So yes, depending on where you're watching, binoculars are going to be really important.
And I will say it's easier to confirm the presence of a male than to confirm a female. So a lot of times you might say a silent bird or an unknown bird. You don't, for me, I don't always feel confident confirming that it's for sure a female, but I do feel confident confirming that it's a male because it's painting and booming, and maybe you see the throat patch. But with the female, if I'm not confident, I'll just say on my data sheet, a silent bird or an unknown. Let's see if I can get my screen to work again. So generally, it's nice to bring a friend or a family member. This is for safety and also for enjoyment. This should go without saying, but we'll say it anyway. Don't trespass on private property while you're looking for birds. This is less of an issue for us in Keene because we're mostly watching from sidewalks or parking lots, that sort of thing. But in that more kind of natural areas or in industrial areas, this is a much greater likelihood that a bird might be on private property. So you just need to be mindful of not trespassing. And of course, you need to think about your own safety here. So this is low light conditions and not everybody's comfortable going out at night in the cities or even in natural areas. So you really want to be staying aware of your surroundings. It can be easy to forget that you're on a sidewalk and you're a road when a bird is doing something really cool and you're watching it. So you need to be aware of your surroundings for not stepping out into the road, being aware of traffic, but also being aware of your surroundings if you happen to be watching alone. And if at any point you feel uncomfortable, you just leave. Do not hesitate. Just pack it up. And some people will watch specifically from standing right next to their car, so that they can get into the car if they feel unsafe. They don't want to venture too far from that. All of that is fine. Whatever you need to do to be safe in low light conditions in a potentially urban setting. And then last year we had a whole bunch of recommendations around COVID safety, and everything's changing so fast. And so we kind of just are saying, be mindful of this, especially if you're around other people, bring a mask with you, especially if you're not vaccinated, and kind of keep apprised of what's going on and what you need to do to keep yourself safe and to keep other people safe with regards to COVID. So now Becky's going to walk us through the data form a little bit.
Everybody's favorite, the data form. First and foremost, please fill it out. If you had no birds, fill it out. If you only watched for 15 minutes, fill it out. They're really important for me to have and for us to have. I can't tell you how many times I've looked back at forms years old, and it's the source of all the data that I have for making a case when I'm consulting on a wind turbine issue. So fill them in. So starting at the top, critical. What date did you watch? Don't estimate, write it down. What date was it really? Where did you watch? And who are you? And then record the time that you started and the time that you ended.
People always forget the end time, but it's really important because then we don't know if the bird stopped doing stuff or you stopped watching.
Yes.
Unless you record the end time.
Yeah. And please do record your additional volunteer time, your travel time, your mileage. That can help us get funding for the work that we're trying to do with Nighthawks, whether it's a grant or matching any state funding. It's really important to have that. So I know it's kind of a pain in the neck, but please try and do that. Weather, just keep it general. Was it warm? Was it cold? Was it windy? Was it not? Was it cloudy? Was it clear? Just a general description. And then when you get there, record whether there was a bird present when you arrived. We have found, Jean Marie, I see your question, travel time, all your travel time. You have to get there and you have to get back. So that's going to be part of your volunteer time, is getting there and getting back. When you get there, if there's a bird that's already present, mark that. If there's not, mark that. What we found is that birds are more likely to be present when you get there at an active site than at an inactive site, or one in which there's no nest. There may be a male present, but there's no nest. And male, female, unknown. If there's a female that you're actually watching sitting on a nest, well, you're going to know that that bird is there as well. But let us know, male or female. Nest status, you may not know, and that's fine. If you don't have a chance to fill that out because you simply don't know, that's fine. If you are lucky enough to watch a nest, or there's a nest there and the birds are still active, then you'll be able to fill it in. but lots of times we just don't know. And then please do, at the end of your watch, fill in the total number of birds that you saw. How many males did you see? How many females? How many unknowns? And then was the male displaying at the site? So what does that mean? Displaying refers to a male that is peating and booming. That's the display. So if it's displaying, if it's doing that dive and you're watching it diving over the site repeatedly, that's displaying at the site that you're at. Occasionally we see birds fly by and they may do a shallow boom up high because there's another bird in the area, but they keep moving through. That's not displaying at the site. When they're displaying at the site, they'll do it more than once. It'll be over a particular roof. Oftentimes a roof you know is stone, but they'll be at a particular, they'll be focused on a particular site. And then it can be really difficult to tell whether there's a female on site. So lots of times that's a maybe, or you can even pencil in, I think so, but I couldn't confirm. That's fine. They're much harder to confirm, as Brett said, than the male. And then when you get there, you're going to record all of the Nighthawk activity that you see or hear, the time it happens, and the time there's a change in the activity. So on this form, you can see at 7:45, they arrived. There was nothing going on. It was quiet, no birds. At 7:50, a male arrived. It was painting, it was circling, and it was booming. So let me just talk a little bit about those activity codes. They came about because when we first started recording behavior like this, we all got tired of writing out painting and writing out booming and writing out chasing. So this is just shorthand to make it easier to fill out the form and to see easily what was going on. If you want to record the full words or write them in later, that's okay. But if you can fill the codes in on that column, it's helpful. And once you get used to them, it's really helpful when you're out in the field, because if there's a lot going on, the less you have to write down, the better. So when we are talking about this sort of number of birds and the type, we're trying to get at whether you've got a male, a female, or an unknown. Maybe you don't know whether it's a male or female, or maybe you know that it's a male, but it is not the male from your site. It's an unknown male. So there are a variety of codes that you can use. The NM means the male on your site. That means if you're at a site and you have a male displaying and peaking and booming, or at your rooftop you're watching, or at the clearing, wherever you are, that's the nest male. Whether there's a nest or not doesn't matter. It's the male on that site. So it's an NM. And then you can see at 7:54, a silent bird arrived. And the watcher had no idea. Was it a male? Was it a female? Couldn't get a good view of it. It was silent. It came in and the male chased it and they both left to the east. It's fine to put down unknown, but it means nighthawk. Unknown does not mean a bird of some kind. It means a nighthawk and you couldn't tell whether it was a male or female. If you have a bird, you're not sure whether it's a nighthawk, we don't have a code for that. You'll just have to write it out. May have been a nighthawk that left the roof, but could have been a killdeer or didn't get a great view of it. That's fine to put in there. Just don't use you, because then I'll think it's a nighthawk. And then after those birds, the male chased the silent bird away, they left to the east, was 7:56. And it was all quiet, nothing going on. Then at 8:03, there was a male painting in the distance to the east. And again at 8:05, a male circling in the east and painting. The one thing that's really helpful is if you know that the male at 8:03 was different from the male at 8:05, make a note of that. you can say a second male was painting to the east. So otherwise, when I look at this form, I can't tell that there were two different males. It looks like just one male. So note, if you know it's a second male, if you know it's a different male, make some note of that. Sometimes as you watch and listen to Nighthawks, you can actually tell voices apart. So we have a couple of Nighthawks that are squeaky. So I use different codes for the squeaky male versus some other interloping male. And that can be a handy thing to use if you have a highly identifiable bird. Okay.
I would just add, get in the habit of looking at your watch or your phone as soon as you see something. I mean, you want to watch the behavior, especially if something really exciting is happening. You don't want to take your eyes off those birds, but you don't want to estimate the times here. You want, you know, this is where it can be also great to have one person be the timekeeper and the other person keeping their eyes on the birds. But, you know, write it down as soon as you can so that you can get those exact timings, because that's, they matter. Okay.
And data says what I keep reiterating. I can't tell you how many times someone has called me and said, I went out and looked, but I didn't see anything. All right, hold on. Let me get out a form. What time did you start? What time did you finish? Please fill out a form letting us know that you are out there, you are looking, if you saw something, or like I was out at the mall the other night, I heard one peep. That's all I heard. I heard one peep. I still want to do a data form on that. I want you to do a data form on that. So we want you to fill out data forms whenever you go out. And then if you see something exciting, if you can send, well, one way or another, whether you do or you don't, if you can send the form in right away, it's great. If you can't send it in, but you did see something of interest, drop a quick email to Brett if you are in Keene, or to me if you are somewhere else, just so we are alerted to the fact that something interesting is going on. We might need to do some follow-up.
And the forms, you can download them either as a PDF on our website, a fillable PDF. So that if you want to type your chicken scratch in so we can read it better the next day, that's fine. You can also just take a photo of your form and email it to us if you want to keep things as simple as possible. Okay, we're nearing the end here. We're running over time, so we'll go quick here for just what to bring with you. A timepiece, your data forms, pencil and clipboard to write on, headlamp for when it gets dark so you can see your data form, binoculars, bug spray, or be prepared. It's mosquito-y even in the city at this hour.
And if you are at a more natural site like the Ossipee Pine Barrens, you need to be prepared for ticks.
Yes. So when coordinated surveys, Becky is going to have a list for Concord and other sites, and I'm going to have a list for Keene. And so after this, you'll get an email from us where we say, email Brett if you want to be added to the Keene list, email Becky if you want to be added to the other lists. And we'll probably do a small handful of coordinated surveys depending on what happens at the first survey and how many birds we see and sites we identify. But individual observations any night in June and July. Would you say early August, Becky, or no?
Probably not. In early August, territories are breaking down. We'd just be following an S site.
So this is the where. Becky, I'm going to let you speak to that, except I want to say that if you're in Keene, Keene State College is a great place to start looking, and also Central Square, just to the west of Central Square on West Street, are places where we've had a lot of activity in the past. So those are good places to get started. And I will also say, Becky, there were some questions about the seacoast. People were wondering if there's birds and where to watch.
Yeah, I'll address that. So the primary areas where we know we've got the most activity are Concord, Keene, and the Ossipee Pine Barrens, and that's where we're doing the majority of the surveying. But we know we have birds in other areas. We have birds in Conway, Grantham. We have had nesting birds in Franklin. We've got birds reported in Leominster and Marlow and on Mount Cardigan. So there are other areas where you can watch. On the seacoast, there used to be nighthawks nesting on the seacoast. We have not had them reported in years and years and years. So unfortunately, it's not a great spot area for nighthawk watching. If you are in Portsmouth and you want to check out a couple of sites, the best thing to do is to look on Google Earth. And if you want, we can kind of do this together, but you look on Google Earth for large buildings with stone roofs, and then just go out and listen for an evening and see if anything's going on. But we have not had reports for a very long time.
And looking for where to watch, Google's aerial view is really great for seeing what places have stone roofs, although some of those pictures are a little outdated as people have roof work done. But that's a thing that I often use. If people say they heard painting in an area, I go and look and see what's gravel. Okay, so just a few, we're running over time. So a couple more slides.
I have a special request. If anybody is really a night owl, I'm looking for data on how late nighthawks are active at night, so to inform and actually document my wind turbine recommendations for shutdowns when there's a nest. So if anybody's a night owl, we need observations from an active nest site that goes until the birds actually stop being active. Sometimes that's 9:15, but they're clearly going much later. We had them late last year. I'd like to get observations until at least midnight. And if the birds continue longer, I'd like to know that too.
So a quick recap. It's best if you watch at a single site for the entire window of time from 8 to 9:30 or later if you're a night owl and want to see when activity actually ceases. It gets hard to see after 9:30, but you can still hear. Clear, calm evenings from a safe location, not on someone's private property unless it's your private property. We're really interested in both the presence and absence of nighthawks. If you looked and didn't see them, that is information that they're not probably nesting there, which is really important information.
It's the only way I can document the decline of nighthawks in the state.
And then you're recording their behaviors and exact times that they occurred. So just a real quick story for Beth, who waited this out. This is a rooftop nest at Elliott. We were looking all summer for these birds and saw them doing what Becky has described, the chasing and looked like they were landing, or we couldn't tell where they were. We had our eyes, we were clued in on a different roof, and they weren't on that roof. They were nearby. And we spent most of the summer looking and never found them. And then I talked to some people at Keene State, and they said, oh yeah, we watched some birds through our office window all summer. They were really cute. And I took a picture with my iPad. And so here is the only documentation we had of successful nesting at that site that year was this mama nighthawk and her chicks, who were about 1.5 feet from the IT office window at the time. And they sent it to us, Cheryl sent it to us, and now we had documentation that the nest was successful in hatching chicks anyway. And then after that, of course, I was all over Keene State in low light hours with my binoculars, hoping to catch a glimpse of the fledglings and not having any success. And sometimes when you do things like that, campus safety comes up and asks you what you're doing, looking at these buildings at 9:30 at night with binoculars. And when I described what I was doing to the campus safety officer, he said, oh, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I saw this little bird sitting on a windowsill. This was over at Huntress Hall. And I thought it was real strange. It didn't really move when I approached it. So I took a picture, and he sent that picture to me. And here is evidence of successful fledging. This is the fledgling. So I never saw these birds. I never saw this nest, and I never saw this fledgling. But we knew something was going on because we saw all these behaviors. And it turns out that 2 other observers who happened to see the birds were the only reason we have successful documentation of these nests. So you never know. They really will surprise you, and you never really know what will turn up. And so it's always good to keep your eyes and ears open. And again, I just want to reemphasize, so we'll send an email out with the link to this recording, but if you want to join these efforts in the Concord, Ossipee, basically anywhere that's not Keene, Becky will be happy to add you to her list of volunteers for those sites. And if you want to go out with us in Keene, or just be going out on your own in Keene, I'm your point person for that. So let me know and respond to the email that we send out, and we'll be happy to go Nighthawk watching with all of you. And we're going to keep our fingers crossed for a really good year with many nests for us to watch. So we are over time, but I'm just going to look real quick to see if there was any questions that didn't get answered that are really pressing.
I think Robert Valuers had his hand up. I don't know if Robert's still on. But Robert, did you have a question? Okay, he may not be there.
Well,
oh, there he is.
Drop us a line with your questions. We'll be happy to answer them. And thank you all for your attention and for your interest in Nighthawks. And we hope to see you out there at crepuscular hours sometime soon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Brett.
Thank you, Becky.